Brian, I suppose, how are you feeling about this week?
Yeah, I think like everybody else, quietly confident. But there's always in rugby, 2 weeks can be totally different. And with the knowledge of what we saw from England last week, they certainly aren't going to be that bad 2 weeks in a row. So that aligned with some injury concerns and the extra pressure on having a Grand Slam to play for. It does feel like it equalises things a little bit, but I think still feel as though Ireland are very strong favourites going into this game.
If you just pick through some of those injuries, obviously Gary being the standout one, how big of a loss is it not having Gary this weekend, and how does that shift things a little bit in Andy's thinking, do you think?
I think it would be a bigger loss if Robbie Henshaw hadn't come back last weekend. I think, 13 is a well-known difficult position to defend from, and so experience is key there. And obviously, Robbie has lots of it. Gary has been in the form of his life this season, particularly defensively. Shutting down space, making big collisions, and unfortunately, he just missed time that one late on in the Scotland game and has him ruled out. But I think there is comfort in knowing that Robbie is back in there. He can play 12 or 13 equally well. And obviously his relationship with Bundy Aki from his Connacht days is significant as well. I don't necessarily think you lose that much because of his potential inclusion. But you want your best players playing on the biggest day, and you have to feel really sorry for Gary Ringrose to miss out on another big chance, to win silverware at home, albeit he'll be there in the stands. It's a tough one to take for him.
How much of a concern is it to throw Robbie in this week? Look, he got back on the pitch and it's great, but obviously to play England in a Grand Slam deciding weekend it's a big ask.
It is, but there's some players that give you total comfort, irrespective of how long they've been out, and I wouldn't say there's a very long list of them, but for me, Robbie is definitely one of the top names in that. I've seen him in the past having an extended period out and then coming back in and having near man of the match performances. So I wouldn't be nervous around it. Of course, there'll be a lack of match sharpness. That's a given. But I think what you get from, you rarely see a kind of below 7 out of 10 performance. And he'll be chomping at the bit as well to make sure that he's not the forgotten guy. The team has progressed really well over the course of the Six Nations, and with Hugh McCluskey and Bundy coming in and doing a role at 12, he'll want to make sure that he reminds Andy Farrell that I was your number one guy last summer. And back in November. Don't forget about me. And you'd have to imagine that he'll be straight back into the 13 jersey.
The other concern, of course, is how Andy plays it at hooker. How big of a worry is it? Again, everything framed by how big of a game it is this week. The fact that the options have been lessened there.
Yeah, of course. Anytime you lose, your number one and two in any position, it's going to be significant. I think people forget quickly about how effective Rob Herring has been when he's played for Ireland. His line out throwing is very good. I wouldn't have known this myself, but my conversations with Rory Best says that he's a pretty good scrummager, probably actually even a little bit better scrummager than Dan Sheehan is currently. So I don't think you're losing anything there. You maybe don't get the same around the park as you do with Kelleher and Sheehan in Herring, but I think he's a very, very good third choice hooker. And if those two are ruled out, it's a massive opportunity for someone maybe like Tom Stewart, that I know has been called into the squad, showed huge potential under 20s and in that emerging tour to South Africa late last year. So he's one for the future, and it doesn't matter how you get your opportunity internationally. It's about whether you take it or not. And if he does find himself on the bench for a Grand Slam game, well, I'm sure he'll relish the opportunity to get a first cap.
I suppose looking at the game as a whole, how do you manage as a player? How do you manage this week? Because I suppose, look, you're at the Guinness Storehouse today. You're asking Irish sports fans. We're all going to have a great week at Cheltenham, a few points on Friday, and then we're going to go and win the Grand Slam on Saturday. It's not that easy, though.
No, it's not. But I think the great thing about it, being a player is you are cocooned, you're away from it all. Yes, you are reading the media, or it's very hard to stay away from a social media point of view. And there's extra excitement, there's extra requests for tickets, I'm sure, but hopefully those players are well insulated by their friends and family. And it's only has been players that now get requested for tickets ad nauseum. Whereas as a player, you tend to be respected and left alone, that those that know you to focus on what's important. So this is a very much a process type team. It really is. They don't get overly excited when they win big, and they don't get too down when they rarely lose, on the occasion that they do lose. So it does feel as though they'll just think about training day to day and just making sure they work on the improvements from last weekend, and they'll think that if they can put out one of their better performances, that this current England team won't have enough to be able to live with them. I think we've seen them as a coming team over the last 2 years, the uncertainty around what they were trying to achieve, and the calls for patience from the coaching staff and from Johnny and one or two of the senior leaders. And sure enough, it's come to fruition. And then the development of that game plan through last year's Six Nations, through the summer tour success in New Zealand, and then a successful November campaign. So I think that the chat within camp has been constant evolution and making sure that they don't become easy to read like they were 4 years ago, where they don't sit back on their laurels and think that they're the finished article. I think there's also the added advantage that they've had an awful lot thrown in their direction, particularly last weekend with the number of injuries, with Josh having to throw in at hooker, but yet they still found a way. I think that, you'll need all those components for a World Cup later on in the year. But before that, we shouldn't get too we shouldn't get too sidetracked with the fact that we've only got 3 Grand Slams to this point. Grand Slams in Irish rugby history are significant occasions, and that we should enjoy it if it does come our way. But we're going to be made work for it, which you would anticipate and expect from any English team travelling over here.
You touched on the World Cup there. You'd be shocked if this interview finished without a question about the World Cup. But in terms of, Brian, of what's coming later on in the year, how important is it that this Ireland team get over the line and just finish off the job this weekend?
Yeah, I think that it's just another injection of confidence, isn't it? They've hit these landmarks over the course of the last few years, consistently beating the top ranked teams in the world. They've gotten to number one. Previously 4 years ago, when they were number one for a couple of weeks, it felt like it wasn't something that they were perhaps necessarily worthy of, because they hadn't shown that consistency of performance like this team has managed to do, and they're wearing it with comfort. I think their mentalities feel very different than teams of the past, where they're taking complete ownership of the fact that they are one of the favourites going into the World Cup, that they will be a very difficult team to be reckoned with, and that the strength and depth that they have generated and built over the course of the last couple of years, through the selection policy of Andy Farrell and through a number of injuries, will actually have reinforced the confidence that if they do miss out on one or two top players that feel as though they're irreplaceable, there are other people to come in and facilitate and do a really good job as we've seen over the course of this Six Nations. So without getting too giddy, too ahead of ourselves, let's enjoy this weekend, and let's hope that we get a trophy at the end. Well, I think we'll get a trophy at the end of it. Let's hope it's the Grand Slam, and then we'll reboot over the course of the summer for an extra element of excitement going into the World Cup, which offers so much. But yet they're still going to have to do it a difficult way, with challenging quarterfinals, a difficult group, challenging quarterfinals, and then we get into that elusive first semi-final. Well, then all bets are off.
Looking forward to it already. I know you're a busy man. Just one final question on Andy Farrell. Obviously, look, he replaced Joe Schmidt. It was a big ask of a job that he took on. Here we stand, days away potentially from a Grand Slam, number one in the world, and as we've alluded to there, in great shape and one of the favourites for the World Cup. How do you assess the job he's done?
Yeah, I think obviously he's done a terrific job. I think he's brought forward all of the good components and foundations that Joe would have built on. And then it kind of feels as though he's brought in a real player ownership as well, very player driven environment, a very cohesive environment. One of the things that you're hearing repetitively about how close they are, how much they enjoy training and playing together and spending time together. And I think that's showing on the pitch. So I think a huge amount of that is down to Andy and the coaching ticket that he's put together. It doesn't. He looks as though he's comfortable delegating to great rugby minds like Simon Easterby and Mike Cass and Paul O'Connell and John Fogarty. And it doesn't feel as though there's any big egos within the environment that holds the team back in any shape or form, which is I think a massive strength of the unity of this whole squad. So I can only have say very positive things about Andy, and who knows what the capabilities of him and his coaching ticket and him and his team are beyond the World Cup as well, because I'm sure you wouldn't want to leave a team that is excelling as well as this Irish team is. It's whatever about what happens later on in the year as well. I think Irish rugby is in a really good spot, for years to come, with the strength of the under-20s as well, and the quality coming through from the school system. So it's a good time to be an Irish supporter.
It's a great note to finish on. Thanks a million, Brian. You're very good.
Thanks, Brian. Cheers.